Tonight, in the middle of the World Cup quarterfinals, a very different kind of drama is unfolding off the pitch, and it has nothing to do with penalty kicks or extra time. According to reports now circulating among European sports journalists, the French government quietly summoned its top sports medicine advisors earlier this week to review something buried deep inside FIFA's own travel logs. And what they found has reportedly pushed the confrontation between Paris and FIFA headquarters in Zurich to a boiling point. The story starts with numbers that, on paper, look almost boring: travel distances, time zones, recovery windows. But when French medical staff laid those numbers side by side, sources close to the Federation say the picture that emerged was anything but routine. Multiple outlets now report that France's path through the knockout rounds has forced its squad to crisscross the continent on a schedule that some describe as the most physically demanding in the tournament's modern history, while other nations advancing through the same bracket have enjoyed noticeably gentler routes between host cities. And whether that gap was pure coincidence or something built into the bracket by design is exactly the question now being whispered about in French sports ministry corridors, and it is a question nobody at FIFA seems eager to answer on the record. For context, tonight's actual quarterfinal sees France facing Morocco, a matchup nobody predicted with such intensity 6 months ago. France arrived at this stage after grinding through a group stage that saw them beat Senegal, cruise past Iraq, and roll over Norway's reserve heavy lineup before surviving a nervy penalty shootout against the Netherlands in the round of 32 and edging past co-host Canada in the round of 16. Morocco, for its part, has become the story of this World Cup. As the last African nation standing, they carry the hopes of an entire continent on their shoulders. And their run to the quarterfinals, powered by standout performances from Achraf Hakimi's backline and a midfield built around Azzedine Ounahi's vision, has turned casual fans across Africa and the Middle East into obsessive, glued to the television faithful. So while millions are focused on Kylian Mbappe against Hakimi tonight, a smaller but louder group of insiders is reportedly focused on something else entirely: whether the travel arrangements that got both teams to this point were ever truly fair to begin with. According to unverified accounts making the rounds among French sports commentators, it was the French Football Federation's own medical council that first flagged the disparity after comparing flight logs, layover times, and mandatory rest periods across every remaining squad in the bracket. Their internal review reportedly found that European teams, France included, were consistently assigned longer transit corridors and shorter recovery windows than teams competing closer to their designated host cluster, a pattern that, if confirmed, would raise serious questions about how FIFA's scheduling algorithm actually works. Sports scientists have long warned that recovery time between elite-level matches is not a luxury. It is a measurable variable tied directly to injury risk, muscle fatigue, and even decision-making speed on the pitch. A squad forced to fly across multiple time zones with barely 2 days to recover before a single elimination match is, in theory, competing at a physiological disadvantage before the referee even blows the opening whistle. That is reportedly the argument French officials are said to be preparing, not as a conspiracy theory, but as a formal appeal for structural reform, one that some sources claim has already reached the desk of President Emmanuel Macron himself. Whether Macron has personally intervened in the way some social media accounts have suggested remains unconfirmed. And it is worth being clear that no official statement from the Élysée Palace has publicly acknowledged any ultimatum sent to FIFA. What does appear to be real, based on French press coverage this week, is growing political attention in Paris toward how host nations and FIFA's commercial partners are treated compared to traveling European squads. This tension is not happening in a vacuum. Earlier this tournament, President Trump publicly weighed in after Folarin Balogun received a red card in a group stage match, asking FIFA directly to review the decision, a rare moment of a sitting American president openly commenting on a refereeing call. That episode alone signaled just how tightly politics and this World Cup have become intertwined, long before any travel schedule controversy surfaced. Add to that the ongoing frustration from Egypt's federation, which released a statement saying it could not stay silent about refereeing decisions after their round of 16 elimination against Argentina, and a picture starts to form of a tournament where governments and federations are increasingly willing to speak out publicly against FIFA's handling of the competition. Now back to the travel question. If the numbers being cited in these reports are accurate, and that is still an if, the scale of the disparity is striking. Some accounts describe a transit corridor stretching well over 3,000 miles for France's knockout stage travel, compressed into a recovery window of barely 2 full days, factoring in flight time, time zone adjustment, ground transportation, and the sleep and nutrition protocols that sports medicine experts say are non-negotiable before elite competition. Compare that, according to the same unconfirmed reports, to opponents who traveled under 400 miles within a single time zone and enjoyed a full 3 days to recover. Same tournament, same round, wildly different physical demands. If true, that is not just an inconvenience. It is the kind of measurable, quantifiable gap that sports scientists say can shift outcomes in matches decided by fine margins. A missed sprint, a half-second slower reaction, an ankle that gives out because the muscles never fully reset. And here's where the story shifts from a football grievance to something with real financial stakes. France, alongside Argentina and Brazil, remains one of the most commercially valuable national teams in this tournament, drawing massive audiences not just domestically, but across French-speaking Africa, North Africa, and the broader European market. Any disruption to France's participation, even a hypothetical one, would send shockwaves through broadcast contracts that were built assuming deep tournament runs from marquee teams. Industry insiders speaking anonymously to trade publications have floated the idea that if a major European power like France were ever to withdraw from a knockout round in protest, the ripple effects on advertising commitments, sponsorship activations, and broadcast rights valuations could be severe, though no such withdrawal has actually occurred and FIFA has issued no statement suggesting one is imminent. It is worth remembering that FIFA's official schedule for this tournament was finalized more than a year in advance, built around 39 venues spread across the United States, Mexico, and Canada, an unprecedented geographic footprint for a World Cup, 3 countries, 3 time zones, and a tournament format expanded to 48 teams for the first time in history. That expansion alone was always going to create logistical headaches nobody had solved before. Never before has a World Cup had to move this many teams across this much continental distance in the space of a single knockout phase, and it was inevitable that some matchups would end up more travel-intensive than others, purely due to bracket geography, regardless of any hidden intent. FIFA has previously defended its scheduling framework by pointing to independent sports science consultants who signed off on rest period minimums across every match in the tournament, arguing that while travel distances vary, no team was assigned a recovery window below the medically recommended threshold. Still, the perception gap matters just as much as the technical compliance. Even if FIFA technically met every minimum requirement on paper, a squad that flies 3,000 miles on a tight turnaround will always feel like it drew the short straw compared to a team that barely left its host city cluster, and perception, especially amplified across social media within hours of a bracket being announced, has a way of becoming its own kind of pressure campaign. That pressure campaign appears to already be building. Fan forums and sports talk shows across France have spent the past several days debating whether the federation should push publicly for a formal audit of the scheduling process, regardless of tonight's result, against Morocco. Some commentators argue that raising the issue now, mid-tournament, only distracts from the team's focus. Others insist that if there is a genuine safety concern, silence would be irresponsible. For Morocco, the narrative could not be more different heading into tonight. There is no travel controversy attached to their run, only pure sporting romance. A nation of roughly 37 million people carrying not just its own hopes, but by extension, the hopes of an entire continent that has never seen an African team reach a World Cup semifinal. Their coach has repeatedly emphasized unity and discipline over politics, keeping the squad's focus entirely on preparation rather than external noise. That contrast, one team wrapped in swirling questions about fairness and governance, the other riding a wave of continental pride, gives tonight's quarterfinal a strange emotional texture. It is simultaneously one of the most anticipated matches of the tournament and a proxy battleground for a much larger conversation about how FIFA treats its most commercially valuable federations behind the scenes. Whatever happens on the pitch tonight, the broader question these reports raise is not going away. As the World Cup format grows to 48 teams and spans 3 host nations, the logistics of getting elite athletes safely from one match to the next across a continent-sized footprint will only get more complicated, not less. And if even a fraction of what is being reported about recovery time disparities holds up under scrutiny, FIFA may find itself facing pressure not just from one frustrated federation, but from a growing coalition of national football associations demanding a transparent, independently audited scheduling process for future tournaments. For now, no team has withdrawn, no ultimatum has been publicly confirmed by any government, and the match between France and Morocco is set to kick off as scheduled. But the questions swirling around fairness, physical safety, and who really benefits from FIFA's scheduling decisions are unlikely to disappear once the final whistle blows tonight, win or lose. If these travel disparity claims are eventually substantiated through independent review, expect this quiet controversy to become one of the loudest post-tournament storylines of the entire 2026 World Cup, reshaping how future host nations and FIFA itself approach the delicate balance between commercial ambition and athlete welfare. Football has always been political at the margins, but rarely has a scheduling spreadsheet carried this much potential weight. Whether it becomes a footnote or a full-blown governance crisis for FIFA may depend less on what happens in stoppage time tonight and more on what independent auditors, if any are ever commissioned, eventually find buried in the data. To understand why this travel dispute landed with such force in Paris, it helps to look at where France stood politically heading into this tournament. Earlier this year, President Macron made a point of publicly urging Les Bleus to chase a third World Cup star, framing the tournament as a matter of national pride at a moment when his government was facing a bruising set of domestic challenges at home. A team perceived as being sabotaged by unfair logistics, even indirectly, does not sit well with a leadership that has invested real political capital in this run. That backdrop matters because it explains why a dispute that might otherwise stay confined to a federation's internal memos instead started leaking into political commentary. When a French head of state has already tied his own messaging to the success of the national team, any hint that the path to that success has been structurally tilted becomes almost impossible to ignore, whether or not a formal government ultimatum was ever actually sent. It also helps explain the timing. This quarterfinal against Morocco arrives at the exact moment European federations are beginning to compare notes across the tournament, swapping travel logs and recovery data the way rival campaigns compare polling numbers. Egypt's public frustration over refereeing after their exit against Argentina, Trump's public intervention over a red card earlier in the group stage, and now these travel disparity reports all point to the same underlying theme, a growing sense among federations, fans, and even heads of state that FIFA's decision-making during this expanded 48-team format has not been transparent enough for a tournament of this scale and commercial weight. Some analysts covering FIFA's governance structure argue that the organization simply was not built, structurally or logistically, for a tournament spread across 3 countries and 3 time zones, with this many teams still alive deep into the knockout rounds. Earlier World Cups, even the larger recent editions, never had to solve for continental scale travel between elimination matches. The jump from 32 to 48 teams was always going to stress test systems that had barely been adjusted since far smaller tournaments decades ago. And this may be the first real crisis that exposes those cracks publicly. For broadcasters, the stakes tied to any disruption go well beyond a single match. Contracts for this tournament were negotiated years in advance, built on projections that assumed marquee teams like France, Argentina, and Brazil would carry deep into the knockout stages, driving premium advertising rates during prime time windows across multiple continents. Even the suggestion that a major European power might contest the fairness of the competition publicly, let alone consider any drastic action, is enough to make sponsorship teams and network executives nervous, because those financial models leave very little room for a marquee team exiting outside of pure sporting results. None of that means an actual withdrawal is on the table. It almost certainly is not, and treating unconfirmed social media chatter about ultimatums and grounded charter jets as established fact would be irresponsible. But the underlying travel data questions being raised by French sports science advisors, whether they end up fully verified or only partially confirmed once independent journalists dig deeper, tap into a real and growing unease about how equitably FIFA has managed logistics for a tournament of unprecedented geographic scale. Inside the French camp itself, the players have publicly kept their focus on the football. Kylian Mbappé, entering tonight's quarterfinal as one of the most scrutinized players in the sport, has said little publicly about scheduling complaints, choosing instead to let his performances answer questions on the pitch. That kind of discipline, staying locked in on the actual competition while federation officials handle the politics behind closed doors, is exactly what elite squads are trained to do. And it is a big part of why France has looked so composed through 5 rounds of knockout football, despite whatever logistical noise has been swirling around them. Morocco's camp, meanwhile, has stayed almost entirely insulated from this entire conversation, and that might be one of their biggest advantages heading into tonight. Achraf Hakimi, playing what many consider the tournament of his career, has talked openly about representing not just his country, but an entire continent that has waited decades for a team to break through this far. Azzedine Ounahi's creativity in midfield, paired with Soufiane Rahimi's clinical finishing up front, has given Morocco a blend of flair and defensive discipline that has frustrated bigger, more heavily favored opponents at every stage of this run. There is a real symbolic weight to tonight's matchup that exists entirely separate from any scheduling controversy. A France versus Morocco quarterfinal carries deep historical and cultural resonance given the two nations' intertwined history, and it is a matchup that fans on both sides of the Mediterranean have been anticipating with an intensity that goes beyond ordinary sporting rivalry. Large diaspora communities across France itself will be watching tonight with divided loyalties, adding yet another layer of emotional complexity to a match that already carries enormous stakes. Whatever ultimately gets confirmed or debunked about FIFA's scheduling practices, one thing seems increasingly likely. This will not be the last time a federation publicly questions how host cities, transit corridors, and recovery windows were assigned across a 48-team, 3-nation World Cup. If France, one of the sport's most powerful and well-resourced federations, is willing to have its medical council openly compare notes on travel fairness, smaller federations with far less leverage are almost certainly having similar conversations privately, even if they lack the political weight to push those complaints into public view the way reports suggest France has done this week. For FIFA, under President Gianni Infantino, the timing could hardly be worse. The organization has spent years selling this expanded format as proof that the World Cup can grow bigger, richer, and more global without sacrificing competitive integrity. A credible, well-documented controversy over unequal recovery time between knockout matches, even if it never escalates beyond strongly worded federation memos and pointed press conferences, undercuts exactly the narrative FIFA has worked hardest to build heading in to this tournament's most lucrative and most watched stage. So, as the whistle approaches for France against Morocco tonight, two very different stories are unfolding in parallel. On the pitch, a footballing clash between one of Europe's most talented squads and the pride of an entire continent. Off the pitch, a quieter, still unconfirmed, but increasingly discussed argument about whether the road to this exact night was ever built on a level playing field to begin with. Both stories, in their own way, will shape how this World Cup is remembered long after tonight's result is written into the record books.